Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you who are logging in to this virtual meeting devoted to unlocking solutions to ensure the future of global food security. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, welcome to this virtual roundtable. For those of you who don't know me, I am Zeid Al Hussein, the president of the International Peace Institute, and I would again like to welcome you most warmly to this meeting. I'd also like to thank our fantastic partners, Bioversity International USA, particularly Trish, Katya, Nelly, and Javier for their tireless support, and to Pari and her efforts from IPI. We're very grateful to you for your efforts. We're here, as I said, to focus on the basic question of how we can transform food systems at all levels for the sake of ensuring human security in a world caught in the grip of climate change. With COP28 around the corner, it is an opportune moment for us to further the attack on this challenge together in the hope of using this momentum to make a real difference. This roundtable is taking place exactly 2 months before the 10th of December, where COP has designated an entire day on food, agriculture, and water, and is likely to adopt a standalone declaration. It also happens to be Human Rights Day and the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Around the world, soaring temperatures, eroding soil, frequent extreme weather events, and disappearing groundwater are taking their toll on food production, accessibility to food sources, and the nutritional value of crops. Bearing in mind also that we have a world population projected to reach 10 billion by 2050, the demand for food will increase between 35 to 56%, while the supply will be reduced. We therefore need strategies rather urgently to blunt the risks to human health, including to severe malnutrition, foodborne diseases, and vulnerability to infectious diseases. In particular, we need to answer the question, how do we address these issues at a global level and forge pathways for a sustainable, equitable, and inclusive food system? Thankfully, today we have a terrific and diverse group of experts and participants who can help answer these questions for us, among whom are scientists, policymakers, private sector representatives, and philanthropies. Together, we can hopefully better understand how to address this challenge and influence the political sphere here in New York and at COP28 for transformative change. This roundtable consists of 2 parts. First, there will be some insights from 4 terrific speakers, Christopher Hamill, Andy Jarvis, Marcela Quintero, and Jess Fanzo. This will last for about 20 minutes and will be recorded. Their bios are in the Zoom chat box. The second part will be a roundtable discussion, and it will not be recorded. It will be Chatham House rules. Each of the speakers will have 5 minutes to set the context, and please include in your remarks the answer to this question too. What is your top-line message for COP28? We will start with Mr. Chris, if I may, Head of Food System Partnerships for the COP28 presidency. And with this question, Chris, how is COP28 different from other COPs on this subject, and what are the major innovations, and where do you see we can push and make some positive change? So over to you, Chris.
Zeid, thank you very much for that warm welcome. Thank you, everybody, for being with me, and not just with me in this event, but with me over the last year as we've been doing our best to engage with as many people as possible. We've had more than 20 consultations over the last 12 months. Many of those have been convened by Her Excellency Mariam Amheri, our Minister for Climate Change and Environment here. We also benefited from a lot of engagement around the UN Food System Stocktake moment when all the regional events that they convened. So to respond to your question first, we are committed, and our leadership is committed to have a landmark moment for food systems and climate at COP28. In our consultations, it was been quite clear that there are two tracks that are now converging. There is a political track, which, as I mentioned, there's been an enormous amount of energy that's been unleashed from the Food System Summit process internationally, as many countries now have to contend with the realities of a very changing and changed landscape when it comes to food systems. Many people are making remarks about food systems being broken, or the disparity in the realities of food systems in certain parts of the world versus others. That's on the political side. And then on the climate side, we've seen sort of a steady drumbeat of progress in this arena. Just even being able to talk about agriculture or sector approaches was a breakthrough some COPs ago. And even starting with COP26 with the ag policy dialogue mechanisms and the breakthrough Aim4C, which we helped launch coming out then. And then, of course, at COP27, with our dear colleagues in Egypt, actually putting food systems as a concept in the broader mix, and having that debate in the negotiations, having that lead to Sharm el-Sheikh Joint Work Program. Our intention is to marry these two streams and to harness that energy to put agriculture, food systems, and climate, put that discussion at the fore of the agenda, and to give it its due as a key element of the discussion, not as a nice to have, but as a must have, starting under our presidency and then embedding it into the agenda going forward. That's the contribution we want to be able to make. And by and large, throughout our consultations, we get the sense that there's appetite for this. And really our hope is to be able to provide a service to the global community by doing this, by being able to mention the term food and food systems in particular within the climate discussion. So that's our intention and the vision. And we are now fully geared up to try to deliver this. So what does that mean? I'll just give you a sense of what to expect at COP28. I know I have a short amount of time here. First, we will begin in the World Climate Action Summit with a segment on food, agriculture, and climate. So it's a head of state moment, the first ever at a COP, specifically looking at this topic. During that moment, we will unveil the Emirates Declaration on Agriculture, Food Systems, and Climate Action. We are doing our best to make this be as an inclusive document as possible, to have as much support from heads of state as possible, so that we get the political will to try to push forward change over the next few COPs and through the 2030 period. Included in the declaration are affirmations, things like in order to accomplish the goals of Paris, we have to deal with and include food systems and agriculture as part of our approaches. Recognizing that NDCs need to be updated for food systems and agriculture if we're going to do this in a meaningful way. It's very specific nods towards innovation in particular as a key modality. The integration between food and water, livelihoods, nutrition. We've done our best to make this be a balanced and comprehensive document, both in terms of livelihoods, resources, different elements of the climate debate, adaptation, and mitigation. So that's our intention, is to have this sort of set the floor for action. In addition to that, that's day one. We will then move throughout the rest of the week, every day having a different event focused on different aspects of food, how it relates to energy, and the energy discussion, how it relates to finance. And then we will end on the final thematic day focused specifically on food, agriculture, and water systems, with a number of announcements from partners featuring different initiatives. How are countries going to implement this declaration? And how are they going to do it under the roadmap that's laid out in the declaration, which is revisiting at COP29? So not wasting any time. We come back immediately at COP29, and countries are expected to account for what they've been up to, and then to agree on the road forward to COP30. I guess the last thing I'll say in closing, In addition to that program, and with the declaration being the chapeau, there are other initiatives that we've been shepherding through. We've got a whole array of programs that we've been working with the high-level champions on that involve non-state actors. We're also trying to make a contribution in a new area, which has to do with agribusinesses and trying to increase their level of contribution and investment in pro-climate related production. We've got a whole piece on innovation, trying to scale up the Aim for C mechanism, trying to determine pathways to scale innovations, and some things related to finance. So anyway, with that, thank you for the time. I suspect I'm already over. I look forward to answering any questions you might have. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Chris. And there are bound to be questions that you've generated in presenting what the intention is at COP28, and it sounds exciting. We'll get to some of the details shortly. If we can now turn to Andy Jarvis, Director of Food, Future of Food, Bezos Earth Fund. Andy, could you also just focus on the practical tools, policies, or mechanisms that are available to the most vulnerable and to the poor in terms of how they can adapt to climate change in the face of the limited resources and capacities and infrastructure that they have? And are these being given adequate consideration by UNFCCC negotiators and the funding community? So please, Andy, over to you.
Great, thanks everyone. This is a high-powered group of people. This is fantastic that we're having these conversations. So when we talk about food systems and climate, really we frame it around that food is a victim. It's a victim because farmers are on the front line. You have over 1 billion farmers in the world who are the first really that are feeling the effects of climate change. They're seeing it on their crops. It's affecting productivity, but it's also affecting the world's poor because of affordability and availability of food as well. So food system is a victim of climate change, but it's also a problem. If you look at the data, food systems are 1/3 of global emissions. We've basically terraformed the planet to produce food. Across 2/3 of ice-free land now is being used for production of food or agriculture, whilst we're seeing other sectors like energy and transport, I would say kind of turning a corner, everything on food in terms of its footprint, its planetary boundaries is going in the wrong way. We continue to need more land to produce the food, to feed more people who are eating more food themselves, and generating emissions as a result. So for every kilo extra of food we need to produce, we're producing more emissions. So we haven't decoupled food from emissions. The final thing is that food is a solution. And I think this is the really important message of hope. It's the only sector that can turn it around, go be a net source of emissions to being a net sink. And there are enormous opportunities in the food system to reduce that environmental footprint, but also to produce food and shift the food system to deliver nutrition to 10 billion people. So we see that food's a victim, a problem, and a solution. But if we focus in on this victim side of things, one of the just to throw out kind of controversial ideas. I mean, one of the things is we've set up an international governance system that and especially within the UN system where we have a kind of agencies that's looking at the food system as a whole, and particularly production of food. And then we have an agency that looks at coming in and solving crises. And when we have a crisis, and the World Food Program, and much of our institutional governance is set up under this guise of we have normal years, and then we have in some place somewhere in the world we have a crisis. We have institutions that jump in and work to alleviate the crisis. More, it's been more of kind of response rather than a kind of reaction rather than prevention. Today, we're in a world where there's a crisis everywhere, almost all the time. And we have enormous challenges happening. And it's not just isolated patches. it's entire regions. It's going to be more and more affecting a larger percentage of the planet at the same time. And so I think it's worth reflecting if we have the right institutional and governance arrangements to actually deal with a world in constant crisis. Now, we're asked to say, what is our hope for COP28 coming in? I hope that Chris is successful in his endeavor, and we very much support everything that the UAE is doing in the COP28 presidency. We are going to have that food moment, I believe, which is a big one. I mean, in the history of kind of food and agriculture in the UNFCCC, it's not been the tightest of relationships. I think we'll have that food moment, and I think it's the responsibility of us as a community to make sure that that food moment becomes momentum. But beyond that, I think the thorny issues need to get put on the table. And as Chris said, the mere mention of food will have people stand up and leave the negotiating table. And I think we need to get some of the thorny issues that kind of are underlying that out in the open. You can't talk about livestock. You can't talk about diet shift. You can't address issues of subsidies. All of these things, if we are going to find a solution, need to be looked at. And the biggest of all, I think, is this dichotomy that we have of adaptation and mitigation in the UNFCCC process. And that does not help in the food system, because food is a victim, it is a problem, and it is a solution. And I think if we are going to look at food, we need to see it in all three of those dimensions. And so this kind of false dichotomy that if you address mitigation in food, it's going to have negative impacts on food security, needs to be broken down. And that's one of the narratives that's generally used a lot. And it's false. I mean, in the agriculture side, we can adapt and mitigate at the same time. These two often go in synergy. And so I think we need to pull that out in the open and recognize that we need, a food system can be sustainable, it can be low emissions, and it can be adaptive, and it can be delivering food security. So it's lots of ands and less buts in our minds. So thanks a lot. Over to you, Zeid.
Well, thank you very much, Andy, for that. And again, I think you will provoke a number of different questions in response. But it's a great way of laying the stage for what is to come this morning. So if I could now turn to Marcela as director at the Alliance. Your research in Cali, Colombia is focused on making the largest impact in global food systems. Perhaps the question that I can pose to you is what needs to be done from the research side to better leverage and maximize the value of interactions with policymakers and ensure that evidence is a key driver for decision making. So over to you, Marcela.
Now, thank you very much. And thanks again for the invitation to this dialogue. And also I would like to start by saying that I'm very pleased also to listen what is coming out from the consultations that Christopher was referring to. And and reaffirming the key role of agriculture and food to tackle the climate crisis, but also, we are actually in the middle of many other crises, right? That now that get mixed with other type of crises, and that just exacerbates the risk that we are having in terms of food security, but also in terms of planet sustainability, etc. So from the research perspective, I want to kind of link with what Andy was saying. How food and how the research that we do in agriculture and food system can be part of the solutions. So here, I wanted to start by kind of putting some examples that we have been working at in the Alliance. We work around the globe in the tropics. And many years ago, the focus was on how we increase food production. But now it's not just about food production, it's about how we make that food production sustainable, how we decoupling food production from emissions, but also how food production and our agricultural systems can drive climate resilience. So I wanted to bring an example of the work that our program on beans has been doing in Africa. So we created a Pan-African Bean Research Alliance many years ago. And right now, actually this year was awarded with the prestigious African Food Prize. And basically, why was that? So that was a not very typical research program on crops. So mainly what we have done there is to produce beans that are more nutritious because are iron enriched, that yield more, so boost the profits of our farmers as well, but also are tolerant to heat. So it's a change completely on the mindset on how we tackle food insecurity in the context of climate change. So of course, it challenged ourselves, the researchers, on not just producing only food, but how we think about that those crops need to be more resilient, need to be more nutritious, need to be more resilient to climate change, need to tackle better changes in the climate, but also are drivers of more resilience to the farmers. So in this program, what has been done is that we work together with the breeders, but also with people working on the market side. So once we kind of unlock the potential of genetic diversity to produce beans that were more tolerant, for example, to droughts or to heat, at the same time, we were working with partners to kind of unlock business opportunities for entrepreneurs and traders involved in the beans value chain. So after the work of all these years, since the beginning of the 2000s, now we can say that we have now more than 37 million small farmers in Africa are having access to climate resilience beans that meet the local demands, that provide more nutritious beans, that boost the yield. So climate resilience is about that. So I think it's important that US researchers are kind of now tackling those type or targeting those type of solutions if we talk about climate resilience. And since this dialogue was about food insecurity, I want to highlight that we need to go beyond just producing more food, but thinking on how that food can drive more resilience itself for the farmers and for the world. The second thing I want to talk a little bit is that when we talk about climate resilience and also food insecurity at the same time, we are thinking about, the staple foods and so on. But resilience is about driving prosperity to farmers. So we cannot leave behind the work on other crops, and especially high-value crops that can represent an opportunity to truly increase the income of the most vulnerable ones. And this is something that we as researchers in the agricultural sector are still lagging a bit behind. We have, for example, bananas, that is the world's most important food crop in Africa, in the world, and is a good source of income generation, but we are not really untapping and unlocking all diversity that we have in banana to feed the world, but also to increase the profitability. So if we don't increase the profitability, we don't increase the prosperity of farmers, and then we don't become then more resilient to climate change. So I hope all these aspects on how we can reshape and reorientate the work and the research on agriculture that goes beyond just producing more food, I think is going to be hard to really respond to the climate adaptation agenda that was just reaffirmed in Sharm el-Sheikh some months ago. Over.
Thank you, Marcela, for that insight. And finally, we now turn to Dr. Jess Fanzo, Director of Food for Humanity Initiative and Interim Director of the International Research Institute for Climate and Society at Columbia University. We're delighted to have you with us. If you could also turn your attention to how and what it would take to move the needle in securing food systems for the future and what needs to be prioritized. So over to you, Jess.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I had one slide I wanted to show that I think is quite powerful. And this work was done by Mike Clark and, and colleagues at Oxford. And what it shows is that in order to reach the Paris climate change targets, and Chris had alluded to this, we need to take multiple actions across food systems. So what you see here is that we need to take action on production, improving efficiency. That means better on-farm practices, fertilizer management, tech improvements on farms. We need to increase yields. That means transferring technologies to sub-Saharan Africa so they can improve their yields. And this is particularly important when we think about climate variability, extreme events, and climate change, and the impacts that will have on yields in future years. But we also need to make changes to diets, moving towards plant-dominant diets, moving towards a healthy amount of calories, the quantity of calories that we consume, and the overconsumption in some places. And then food loss and waste. And what you see is to get to a 67% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees, that second hatched bar, we need to do all of these well. So we need massive transformation across the food system, and it's not something we can take lightly. And interestingly, while this looks daunting, we have a lot of solutions, but we need scale. We need scale and we need investment from governments and private sector working in partnerships. Nellie, you can unshare the screen if you'd like. So while it looks daunting that we need to make these massive transformations across various aspects of the food system, across the entirety of the food system, from production to supply chains to what people eat and what they choose to eat, and the loss and waste of food, there's been so many solutions tried. We just need those scaled. I just, on some of the, building on some of the comments on COP, I hear a lot recently that, and Chris probably has a good answer to this, don't push food too hard at COP because it distracts from the fossil fuels issue. To me, that is a non-starter, because if we address the fossil fuel issues, we will also address potentially food system issues. So there's a marriage there that needs to happen. But I think, as Andy had said, we need to do all of it. We need to reduce fossil fuels. We need to ensure that food systems are more sustainable if we truly want to reach the Paris targets, because food systems contribute 30% of greenhouse gases. So to me, that argument is worrisome to hear, particularly from the energy sector, but one in which I think we need to do our homework and work ensuring that the energy sector is on board with the food sector when we go into policy negotiations. The other big issue that I see is the diet piece. When you saw that diagram, diets, plant-based diets, make a significant contribution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And the issue with COP is most governments will say, we're not going to deal with diets. That's infringing on people's self-liberties, their choice. We're not going to deal with trying to change what people want to eat. The problem is that puts the responsibility on eaters who are already constrained. So we, the collective we, particularly governments and private sector, we need to help eaters. We need to give them choice. We need to ensure that they can have physical, economic, and social access to healthy and sustainable foods. And again, there's so many solutions out there. Andy's group is working on alternative proteins, a growing space. And we can talk about that. But this idea, and Chris, I'll be curious to see how things go at COP, this idea of having governments really be laissez-faire when it comes time to diets, and not touching diets as a political issue, is one that will remain probably contentious at COP. It's much easier to deal with agriculture policies than deal with the choices that people make. So diets can have a huge contribution to the climate agenda. It's how we do that at COP and politically, but also just through governments and private sector action and holding them to account to help consumers and eaters, give them choices so they can move towards those healthier and sustainable diets. And I'll end there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jess. And again, a thank you to all of the speakers who spoke and introduced the subject matter. We will now turn on.